They say silence is the loudest betrayal, and I heard it echo off the marble floors of the house I used to call home. It wasn't just the silence of my name being absent from the will or the estate papers, it was the silence of the rooms, stripped bare of any sign that I had ever existed. No pictures. No books. Not even the ceramic figurine I made in second grade that used to sit near the fireplace. I stood in the grand entryway of our family's $7.5 million estate with its tall windows and imported stone floors, watching as the light danced across spaces that once cradled birthday parties, holiday dinners, and midnight snacks in the glow of the open fridge. Now it was a mausoleum, polished and hollow, a monument to my sister's ambition and my parents' surrender. I had just come from the airport, fresh off a 14-hour flight from Thailand, where I had spent the last year immersed in a humanitarian fellowship focused on rural mental health infrastructure. I left with calloused hands, sunburnt shoulders, and a belief that when I returned, I'd be welcomed home with pride. I expected to see my mother's teary eyes and my father's slightly awkward but heartfelt hug. What I got instead was a text from my sister, cold and perfunctory. "The funeral is Thursday. I handled the arrangements. Don't be late." I arrived the day before, suitcase still bearing the red soil of a country my parents had never cared to visit. My old bedroom door, painted lilac with stickers still barely clinging to its surface, was now gone, replaced with oak. When I opened it, I found nothing inside but neatly folded towels and a steamer trunk marked guest linens. My room had been gutted. My closet, once filled with journals, sketches, and worn-down sneakers from hikes I used to take behind the Vineyard, had been converted into a utility storage. The scent of lavender-scented mothballs was so overpowering, it clung to my hair like an accusation. Downstairs, in the dim quiet of the library, I found them. The will. The new family trust. Bank statements. Everything rewritten, reassigned, reimagined to reflect a family structure that no longer included me. Offshore accounts I never knew existed, vintage art collections recently appraised, and the Vineyard. God, the Vineyard, renamed under a new LLC managed solely by my sister, Camille. And my parents? My mother wouldn't meet my eyes for more than a second. My father, once the man who built tree forts with me and made me believe in logic and fair play, just shook his head and muttered, it was complicated. That was all he would offer me, complication. As though the erasure of a child could be neatly explained by paperwork and estate planning logistics. Camille, of course, met me with a smile. That smile, the one she had perfected over years of private schooling, debutante galas, and trust fund networking events, was razor-sharp beneath its practiced warmth. She greeted me like I was an old friend she hadn't seen in years, not the sister she had systematically removed from our parents' affections and legal affairs. At the funeral, she even dared to wrap her arms around me and whisper, "We're so glad you made it home in time." I smiled back. I smiled the way you smile when your dress is 2 sizes too tight, but you don't want to ruin the photo. I smiled through the eulogy she gave, where she wept about how Dad taught us how to plant grapevines in the summer sun, as if I hadn't spent every summer in college studying abroad, while she sat at his side like the heir apparent. I smiled through condolences from family friends who somehow remembered me only as the one who was always away. I smiled through the photo slideshow that didn't feature a single image of me past the age of 16. But inside, I was taking notes. I began collecting receipts before the last mourners had left the estate. And by receipts, I don't just mean paperwork, I mean memories, patterns, slips in speech, timelines that didn't add up. Camille had always been cunning, but her strength was also her weakness. She believed herself untouchable. That was the problem with liars who got too comfortable. They forgot how easy it was to expose the seams. I started with the guest list. It might sound strange, but you can tell a lot about people by who they choose to surround themselves with when power shifts. Camille had invited 2 old family lawyers to the reception, both of whom had advised our parents for decades, and yet neither one of them had seemed surprised that I was cut out. One even referred to me as the wayward one, as if taking a fellowship to provide psychological resources to underserved communities made me some sort of prodigal disappointment. Next came the legal filings. I stayed up late that night in the cold room that used to be my bedroom, scanning through court registries and property deeds using a hotspot connection and an aging laptop. Camille had moved fast. She had transferred Vineyard ownership before either of our parents passed, which meant one of them had been convinced, coerced, or broken enough to give her control prematurely. The home, the assets, the family trust, she'd moved everything through shell companies, offshore holdings, and irrevocable changes to the estate plan. It wasn't just betrayal. It was premeditated. And yet, I never said a word to her. Not then. Not in the weeks that followed. I played my role to perfection. The dutiful, understanding sister returned from the ends of the earth. I thanked the guests. I cleaned up the dishes. I sat with our mother when Camille got too busy to manage the estate meetings. I brought her chamomile tea, watched her avoid my gaze, and asked gently about her medication schedule. I knew she felt guilty. I also knew Camille had spent the better part of a year convincing her that I was unstable, erratic, untrustworthy, whatever it took to shift the narrative. When my father's safety deposit box was finally unlocked, I found the first real key to the puzzle. A small, leather-bound notebook. Pages of scrawled handwriting. Bits of notes about vineyard yield, rare bottle catalogs, and one line, just one, that stopped me cold. Camille is pushing for control. Don't let her isolate your sister. That was all I needed. From there, the unraveling began. I tracked down our old vineyard manager, a man named Matteo who had worked with us since I was 13. Camille had fired him last December with little notice. But what she didn't know was that Matteo had kept backups, inventory logs, emails, signed statements from my father expressing concern about Camille's aggressive tactics. He handed them to me over coffee in a roadside cafe outside Napa. His eyes were tired, his hands calloused, but his words were clear. Your dad knew something was wrong. He just didn't know how to stop it. Back in the house, I found old correspondence tucked in the back of the attic desk drawer, letters from my mother to Camille's private financial advisor. Not notes of love or trust, but questions. Fear. Doubts about the speed of the financial transfers. Hints of pressure. The lines between manipulation and coercion were starting to take shape. I collected everything. Every document. Every time-stamped transfer. Every shift in legal representation. And then I built a dossier not just of facts, but of motive, of method. Because revenge, when done right, is never about explosions. It's about erosion. It's about watching someone who built an empire out of fraud slowly realize that the foundation was cracked from the start. And I had time. She thought I was licking my wounds in the guest room, quietly mourning. But I was gathering an arsenal. She thought she'd won. She had no idea I had just entered the game. They say that if you want revenge, dig 2 graves. But they never tell you what to do while you're digging. I dug with a smile on my face. I smiled at every dinner Camille invited me to at the estate, wearing pearls she inherited from our mother like she'd earned them. I smiled when she introduced me to her new friends as my globe-trotting sister. She's into humanitarian work or whatever. I smiled when she poured me wine from a bottle labeled under the family's new rebranded vineyard, Camellia Noir, and asked me to toast to our future, as if I wasn't already erased from the past. I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I didn't cry, scream, or stomp my feet the way she probably hoped I would. Camille thrived on chaos, and I refused to hand her any. What I gave her instead was the performance of a lifetime, graceful, quiet, cooperative. A woman humbled by circumstance. A daughter paying her respects. A sister too grateful for scraps to ask for more. But every night, while she fell asleep curled up in French linens and daydreams of power, I was reading. I started with the Vineyard Trust. Our family had set it up during the early 2000s, when the vineyard first began to produce rare varietals that attracted private collectors. It was intended to protect the land, ensure fair division of profits, and most importantly, guard against sudden liquidation. Camille had maneuvered control of it through pressure and timing. Our mother's cognitive decline had started just before she signed the amendment papers, and Dad, already worn down by grief and illness, had handed over the reins out of exhaustion, not conviction. I went through every clause, every subclause, every dull paragraph about soil rights, climate risk insurance, and European export taxes. I highlighted things, then unhighlighted them. I read until my vision blurred and my temples throbbed. And then one night, past midnight, with only the hum of my laptop and a faint whisper of wind outside the attic window, I found it. It wasn't bold. It wasn't dramatic. It was a single sentence buried on page 57 of a revised supplement that Camille likely never read because it wasn't flashy enough to catch her attention. A conditional clause that had never been triggered because, well, no one knew it was there. The clause stated that any restructuring of the Vineyard's inheritance plan must be signed and notarized by both primary trustees and a designated third-party arbitrator named in the original trust, a man who, according to a footnote, had passed away in 2009. The form had never been signed again. Not once. Not by Camille. Not by my parents. Not by anyone. Which meant every legal transfer that Camille made using that trust as leverage wasn't just unethical, it was invalid. But the beauty of this discovery wasn't in its revelation. It was in its secrecy. Camille didn't know. Not yet. And I had no intention of telling her until the moment it would hurt her the most. 3 weeks after that night, I packed a bag, deleted my old email, created a new identity, and left the estate under the pretense of moving somewhere quieter to heal. I told Camille I'd accepted a small nonprofit job in Portland. She hugged me at the train station, squeezed my hand like we were friends again, and said, "Try not to disappear off the map this time." I kissed her on the cheek and promised I'd keep in touch. She never saw me again. Not as me. Instead, she started seeing someone named Elise Vaughn. Elise had a sleek LinkedIn profile, a neutral accent, and a perfectly curated CV that placed her as a rising associate at a boutique real estate investment firm in Northern California. Elise didn't volunteer in jungles or post about mental health equity. Elise was efficient, private, and business-oriented. She kept her head down, dressed in grays and navy blues, and spoke just enough to be respected but never remembered. I built her carefully, deliberately. I even created a fake backstory about a father who owned commercial real estate in San Diego and a mother who taught dance. I spoke of siblings with neutral names, of a private education in Vancouver, and an affinity for Pinot Noir. I wanted Elise to be someone Camille would never suspect or even glance at twice. I was hired within the month. The firm wasn't huge, but it was connected, and more importantly, it specialized in land acquisition. I started by learning the language of the trade: title abstracts, easement disputes, contingency clauses. I sat through hours of development zoning meetings and public land access briefings. I was the last to leave the office and the first to arrive. I volunteered for every project no one else wanted and made sure to ask the right questions, never too curious, but always competent. Within 6 months, I was assigned my first solo project, evaluating parcels of land surrounding a newly commercialized winery in Napa. When the address pinged on my screen, I nearly laughed. Camellia Noir. The firm wanted to explore whether the surrounding properties had potential for event centers, eco-lodges, or high-yield agriculture. I requested full title histories on all 18 parcels that bordered the estate. The reports came back thick with decades of fragmented ownership, retired couples, aging farmers, and corporate investors who had long since gone bankrupt. I started making offers. Quiet ones. Through shell companies, holding firms, and third-party representatives, I purchased 5 parcels in the first year. Each one was acquired under different names, often through short-term loans and quick turnarounds that wouldn't draw attention unless someone was specifically looking. Two of the lots were just overgrown hills. One had an old barn. Another included a small natural spring that Camille's vineyard had been using illegally, as it turned out, for supplemental irrigation during the dry seasons. That last one was my favorite, because when I shut down access to the spring, citing water rights acquisition through a legitimate LLC, Camille had no idea who was behind it. She threw a tantrum on Instagram, ranting about predatory land investors and the scourge of big business encroaching on family land. Her followers, mostly pseudo-celebrities and travel influencers who loved sipping rose in the vineyard's infinity pool, rallied to her defense. I liked every post. I commented with supportive emojis. I sent her a private message from my real account that read, "So sorry you're dealing with all this. If you need anything, I'm here." She hearted it. The same night, she posted a story from her luxury treehouse suite, laughing with two models from Miami and sipping wine labeled with our family crest, rebranded to Legacy Harvest. I watched the video 3 times, then turned back to my screen and reviewed the next 3 properties on my acquisition list. One of them had been in the same family for 70 years. A widow lived there now. She loved her garden, her swing set, and the view of the hills that Camille's drone footage always caught during her vineyard promos. I met her under the guise of being an assistant to a sustainability nonprofit, brought her flowers, talked about birds. 2 months later, she agreed to sell. Camille didn't notice. Not yet. The truth is, revenge doesn't always look like sabotage. Sometimes it looks like patience. It looks like Sunday mornings spent in coffee shops with blueprints. It looks like emails written in legalese and contracts reviewed 4 times before sending. It looks like kindness, strategic, practiced kindness, handed out to people who still think you're broken, lost, or irrelevant. What Camille didn't understand was that by pushing me out, she gave me perspective. I no longer wanted a piece of the estate. I wanted to own the silence around it. I wanted her to wake up one day, look out at her perfect vineyard view, and realize the land stretching beyond it, once dismissed as nothing but dirt, was mine. I wanted her to pitch a tent for her influencer retreats and discover that the noise ordinance had changed. I wanted her to launch a new irrigation system and find that the rights had shifted. I wanted the world she built, the one she thought she had secured, to close in on her inch by inch, until she had to look for the person she left behind to find a way out. I wasn't just collecting land. I was collecting leverage. And it was almost time to use it. But before I could make the final move, I had to see the estate again. I needed to feel the land beneath my feet, hear the sound of the gravel under my boots, smell the wine-soaked soil that had once defined my childhood. So I made an appointment. As a lease. I booked a tour under the name Vaughn Investments. I requested a private session to explore possible partnerships in ecotourism and boutique hospitality. Camille's assistant confirmed the date immediately, no doubt thrilled at the thought of a potential investor with serious capital and sustainability interest. Camille was always chasing relevance through greenwashing and buzzwords she barely understood. When I arrived, she didn't recognize me. To be fair, I looked different. Hair darker, skin tanned, a slight accent. I wore a tailored blazer, flat shoes, and a name tag that read Elise Vaughn V. Invest Group. She shook my hand with that same soft, rehearsed squeeze she used on camera. "Welcome to Camellia Noir," she said, beaming. And I smiled. I smiled the way a shark might if it could pretend to be vegan. There are moments in life that don't just split time, they cauterize it. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a reckoning. A full year had passed since I walked away from the estate, still wearing the mask of sisterly grace, still calling Camille by affectionate childhood nicknames as if I didn't already know what she'd done. 12 months of strategic silence. 12 months of smiling behind wine glasses and boardroom doors while the world called Camille the visionary behind one of the most exclusive vineyards in the country. 12 months of shaping Elise Vaughn into a whisper in elite circles, a name that carried weight, quietly, deliberately. I didn't want her crown. I wanted her to hand it to me trembling. And the night of the gala was when it finally happened. Camille had spared no expense. Everything about the evening was curated to signal power: artisanal menus, crystal chandeliers strung above the vineyard lawn, and soft jazz playing under the distant hum of drone cameras that circled like vultures in slow motion. She wore a backless gown the color of blood-soaked roses, and she smiled like a woman who believed the kingdom was hers by divine right. Guests arrived by the hundreds: media personalities, local politicians, influencers in curated silk, and the same wine investors who had once toasted my father's legacy as if it were holy scripture. Their laughter echoed across the vineyard rows, careless and sharp, slicing through the scent of aged Pinot and wood smoke. She called it Harvest Ascend, a name dripping in pretension and vanity. A celebration, she said, of legacy, transformation, and the future of Napa's wine elite. But that night, it wasn't the future she was stepping into. It was mine. The final piece had fallen into place 3 days earlier. I'd been watching Camille's social media feed obsessively, not because I needed updates, but because I needed the exact time she would begin her victory speech. Her team, as usual, leaked it in advance to ensure the perfect spotlight moment for the press. 7:30 p.m. Main stage. Firework backdrop. That's when the microphone would pass to her. That's when the photographers would swarm. That's when I would walk in. The legal documents were already waiting in my briefcase, neatly organized and authenticated. The footage, unedited, time-stamped, irrefutable, was ready on a secure drive. The final land purchase, a narrow strip no wider than 200 feet, had closed that morning. It was nothing but a dirt road to most, but to Camille's operation it was everything. The only entrance to the vineyard. And now I owned it. I arrived at 7:29. Not through the guest entrance, but via the maintenance path from the southern slope, quiet, dimly lit, flanked by the last few wild grapevines my father had never allowed Camille to touch. I wore black, not out of symbolism, but because I wanted to move like a shadow until it was time to burn. The power cut wasn't dramatic. It was surgical. A 3-second pause. Then the hum of generators cut off. The floodlights blinked once, twice, and died. The music faded. The screens dimmed. Panic rose, slow and uncertain, like fog creeping across the valley. And then, a single spotlight flickered on. Right on me. I walked forward, not rushed, not theatrical. Calm. Steady. Holding nothing but one single document in my hand. Camille's face, frozen in the middle of what was supposed to be her triumph, morphed from confusion to horror in less than 5 seconds. She opened her mouth to speak, but the microphone was already mine. And I had the room. "Ladies and gentlemen," I began, my voice steady, my gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. "I won't take much of your time. Just enough to return something to its rightful place." No one moved. Some people recognized me. Some didn't. Some whispered my name under their breath like a ghost they hadn't expected to see again. "I'm here tonight not as a guest," I continued, holding up the document between my fingers, letting it catch the remaining light, but as the legal owner of every parcel of land surrounding this vineyard. Including, I said, letting the words land with deliberate weight, the private road you all used to arrive here tonight. There was a ripple, a sound like shifting fabric or the collective inhale of 100 people realizing the party had just ended and something else, something real, had begun. Camille stepped forward then, her voice too high, her composure slipping like makeup in the rain. "This is absurd," she said, reaching for the mic. But I didn't stop. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I simply turned to her, document still raised. "And this," I said calmly, "is a notarized clause from the Vineyard Trust. One that requires 2 signatures for any asset transfer to be valid. One of those signatures," I turned slowly, looking directly at the cameras now recording, "was never collected. I let the silence stretch. It voids the will. Every amendment. Every deal. Every illusion built on the lie that this land belonged to anyone but the true heir. The crowd was shifting now, guests murmuring, eyes darting, phones already buzzing with whispered tweets and breaking headlines. I turned to Camille again. "The vineyard," I said softly, "doesn't belong to you." Then I took the drive from my pocket. I didn't want to do this, but truth demands weight. I handed the drive to the technician. He plugged it in, and the screen behind us came alive with color. At first, it was just the image of my mother seated on the veranda, her hands twisting a linen napkin in her lap. My father beside her, thinner than I remembered, his shoulders slumped under the weight of something deeper than age. And Camille, just off frame, her voice cold, calculated, and unforgiving. "I swear to God, if you change the will back, I will leak everything about the trust fund and what you did in 1987. You think the press won't care? You think people won't crucify you for what you buried?" My mother's voice broke then. "We were trying to protect the family." "And I'm protecting the name now," Camille snapped. "So unless you want your entire legacy turned into a tabloid headline, you'll sign the damn papers." The clip ended, not with a bang, just with my father nodding once, defeated. The screen went dark, and no one spoke. Not even Camille. She didn't collapse dramatically. There was no screaming, no fainting spell. Just a slow, terrifying unraveling, the kind that starts at the seams and doesn't stop until the whole thing is threadbare. Someone in the crowd asked quietly, "Is that real?" A reporter stepped forward, already live streaming. "Do you have a response, Ms. Maynard?" Camille turned to the cameras, her mascara smudged, her carefully crafted persona splintering beneath the weight of exposure. She tried to speak. Failed. Tried again. Failed again. And then she dropped the mic. Literally. It hit the ground with a sound that echoed far louder than anything else that night. I didn't stay for the aftermath. There was no need to. By morning, every outlet from Wine Connoisseur to Variety had picked up the story. Headlines ranged from "Camille Maynard's Vineyard Empire Crumbles" to "The Forgotten Sister Who Took It All Back." Investors pulled out. Collaborations dissolved. Influencers deleted posts. Sponsors dropped her like a name whispered in a scandal. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't call or text her. I didn't even block her. I simply walked the vineyard that afternoon, barefoot, alone, feeling the soil press into my skin the way it used to when I was 12, running between the rows with juice-stained palms and no concept of betrayal. The land was quiet. It didn't cheer or applaud. It just was. And that, I think, was the most powerful part of it all. Because for the first time in a long time, I wasn't chasing justice. I wasn't carrying grief. I wasn't haunted by loss or rage or the echo of what could have been. I was standing where I belonged. And I had made it mine again. They asked me to stand behind a podium, but I chose to stand in front of it. I didn't want anything between myself and the women in that room, lawyers, students, survivors, senators. It wasn't about the optics. It was about the weight of truth and how sometimes it deserves to be delivered without a barrier, without polish, without a single inch of distance. The name tag on my blouse read E. Maynard. And this time, I didn't flinch when I saw it. A year had passed since the night the vineyard was reclaimed, not just legally, not just financially, but spiritually. I say reclaimed because one never felt right. You win a prize. You reclaim a legacy. And this legacy, tangled and scarred as it was, had never belonged to Camille, no matter how many lawyers she paid or documents she forged. That evening in the vineyard, the one with the power outage and the spotlight, didn't end a story. It detonated the silence that had buried the truth for too long. In the weeks that followed, I wasn't just clearing my name. I was unspooling every thread Camille had knotted into that estate. Offshore accounts were traced. Contracts she manipulated were reviewed and retracted. Even her so-called brand partnerships evaporated like fog under sunlight. But today was different. Today wasn't about her. It was about what came next. The Estate Law Reform Summit had started as a quiet initiative from a grassroots legal collective in Washington, D.C., a group of young attorneys who had seen one too many cases of elder coercion, inheritance fraud, and women erased from their own bloodlines by manipulative siblings or controlling spouses. When they first reached out to me, they assumed I would decline. They were kind in the email, polite, careful, as if my story might still be a bruise instead of a battle scar. But I replied within an hour, I'll come. I won't just speak, I'll testify. The room was full now, more than 300 in-person attendees and thousands watching online. It was the final day of the summit, and I was the closing speaker. My Vineyard's name, now rebranded to Vassala Estate, was printed on the brochure. Below it, in bold lettering, Keynote, the silence clause protecting the forgotten heir. I took a breath. Not because I was nervous, but because I wanted the moment to feel real in my chest. My voice didn't shake. It never did anymore. I was never supposed to be standing here, I began, letting my eyes rest on a row of young women in the front. They looked barely 20, future litigators, maybe future whistleblowers, all of them holding pens and notebooks like weapons. I was supposed to vanish quietly. I was supposed to accept the revised documents, the erased name, the missing keys, and move on. A few people nodded. Some didn't blink. But silence isn't surrender. Silence is a strategy. I let the words linger, not just for drama, but for depth. Because there's something sacred about reclaiming a voice that someone else tried to bury under years of curated lies. I spent a year watching my sister call herself the sole heir to an estate she manipulated our parents into handing her. I watched as she smiled in press interviews, hosted influencers on land I used to run barefoot across, and renamed our vineyard after herself, as if she had built it from the soil up. The memory was still sharp, but the bitterness had faded. What was left now wasn't revenge, it was purpose. I didn't fight her directly. Not at first. I studied. I waited. And when I moved with precision. Because justice doesn't always arrive with sirens. Sometimes it arrives with receipts. Laughter rippled across the room, not mocking, not hollow. Just warm, familiar. The sound of women who'd seen too much and survived anyway. I stepped to the side and clicked the remote. A screen lit up behind me, showing the new crest of the Vassala estate, a stylized grapevine woven with the silhouette of a young girl holding a gavel. Beneath it, in clean serif font, rooted in justice. The estate now funds full scholarships for underrepresented girls pursuing degrees in law, I said, the slide changing to show 5 smiling recipients from last year's cohort. Every bottle sold supports the next generation of women who won't just know the rules, they'll write them. Another slide. A map of the vineyard's restructured land holdings. Smaller parcels turned into educational gardens, community farming initiatives, and trauma-informed retreat spaces for women affected by inheritance fraud or legal manipulation. I didn't just want to build a legacy. I wanted to build a shield. I'm not here to share a revenge story, I continued, stepping closer. I'm here to warn you. The laws that govern estate transfers are still full of shadows. Clauses go unchecked. Signatures get forged. Heirs get cut out not because they're unworthy, but because they're inconvenient. I paused. And too often, those heirs are women. A quiet hush settled across the crowd, and I could feel the weight of it sink into every chest. My sister is living abroad now, I said, not with triumph, but with a strange calm. She's under investigation in 3 countries for financial misconduct, document tampering, and tax evasion. But this summit isn't about her fall. It's about making sure there's a system in place that prevents others like her from rising in the first place. Afterward, I was swarmed. Not in the glamorous way Camille once courted attention, but in the way that felt like truth finally had a pulse. Students handed me essays about unjust disinheritance cases. Lawyers asked for data. Survivors, some trembling, some teary-eyed, whispered thank yous like prayers they'd been holding in for decades. And yet, even in that sea of voices, one moment stood apart. A girl, no more than 19, approached me near the refreshments table. Her hands shook slightly as she held out a folded letter. "My name is Layla," she said, her voice barely above a breath. "My uncle tried to take everything from me after my mom died. I didn't know what to do, but then I read about you. I kept this letter in my drawer for months. I told myself if I ever met you, I'd give it to you. Because you didn't just win, you showed me how to fight." She pressed the letter into my hand and vanished before I could ask anything else. Later that night, in my hotel room, I opened it. Inside were 2 lines, written in tight, careful print. "She stole what was mine while I was silent. But when I finally spoke, I didn't just take it back. I rewrote the rules." I sat there in the glow of the city, letter trembling in my hands, and smiled. Not because it was over, but because something new had begun. Back at the estate, my estate now, the wind still whispered through the vines. It no longer sounded like ghosts. It sounded like music. My parents' names were still carved in the foundation, weathered and chipped. For a long time, I thought about removing them, replacing them, rewriting the stone like I had rewritten everything else. But I didn't. Instead, I added something. Just below their names, a new engraving, clean, sharp, resolute. Elena Maynard. Heir. Builder. Keeper of the line. It was done in bronze, so it would never fade. I stood there in the late afternoon light, watching as the sun caught on the metal and turned it to gold. No crowds. No cameras. No applause. Just the land. The legacy. The name. Mine. She stole what was mine while I was silent. But when I finally spoke, I didn't just take it back. I rewrote the rules. Subscribe for more stories where silence isn't weakness, it's the start of strategy.